and its title is Adapting Journalism to the Web. And it's going to be a wide-ranging discussion about the ways in which the journalistic principles and techniques of the print era are migrating or not migrating onto the web, and whether that's a good or a bad thing. The final event will be held at the end of the term in early May, on May 4th, and it's titled Electronic Literature and Future Books. And I hope many of you will attend that event and pay attention to that, or check our website where our events are archived in various formats. It remains only for me to welcome our speakers and to indicate to those of you in the audience who are new today that in some sense this forum represents a kind of culmination of a day-long set of conversations amongst documentary filmmakers, producers, media practitioners of various kinds, and scholars. And my hope is that the people at the table will remember that some members of the audience haven't been there for your earlier discourse. Distill your ideas. We're very eager to hear your most powerful and compelling insights about this central subject. Our moderator today is my friend and colleague, William Uricchio, the director of the Comparative Media Studies program and the author of, or editor of a number of significant books, including most recently two books that I think are edited books, Media Cultures and We Europeans, Media, New Collectivities, and Europe. I perhaps should conclude here by saying that as the Comparative Media Studies program has evolved, especially trying to recover from the departure of the visionary Henry Jenkins, William Uricchio has been our lodestar and leader. And he's been doing, I think, quite remarkable work in renovating and reconstituting the Comparative Media Studies program. One piece of evidence for that is this remarkable forum and the activities that preceded it, in which so many media practitioners began to talk about new forms of documentary. William.
David, thanks. Thanks for the kind words. And thank you for coming tonight. So, as David said, we had a very exciting day behind our back. This is, in a certain way, the culmination of the day. And it brought together, as David said, makers and academics, but it also brought together funders and folks from festivals. And the mix was an unusual mix. You don't often see more than two sets of these players in one room at one time. What's going on right now in documentary is nothing short of transformational, amazing. One of the things I spoke about this morning in my opening comments, I tried to make the case that what's happening today with interactive, usually online documentary, sometimes location-based documentary, sometimes transmedia documentary, there's a lot of form out there. What's happening today is, to my mind, very similar to what happened almost 100 plus years ago with the birth of the film industry. Documentary, which some of us think of as the kind of lame cousin of the feature film, has in fact been a driver of technology. It's been out in front from the get-go. Something like 80% of the films made between the start of film in 1895 and somewhere around 1904, 1905, close to 80% of what was copyrighted anyway was nonfiction. Now, in our world today, that seems a little odd because we would probably think that most of what's out there is fictional. If you look at some of the first sound films, The Jazz Singer is the one we celebrate here in the U.S., but in Germany, the first sound film was Melodie der Welt, a documentary. In Russia, it was Vertov's Enthusiasm. So documentary, again, was pushing the envelope in terms of trying out new technologies. A lot of new color technology was deployed with documentary. A lot of the advances in 16 millimeter and portable sound, the advent of cinema verite and direct cinema. That transformation in production is something that occurred in documentary. And not just that it's not just about new tools. There was a reimagination of the subject, of the relationship between the maker and the subject that those new tools made possible. And I guess where we are today is at a real turning point in film. Things like interactive film that the Media Lab, the place we're in right now, pioneered in back in the 80s. Those techniques, which were very labor intensive, very technology intensive, have become quite simple with our new technologies. And documentary, as ever, is the first to pick that up and drive it ahead. So the folks here at this table today all represent people who are working in different aspects of these new developments, and I'll introduce them in a second. But the thing I really want to emphasize, and it was the point of today's discussion, these new developments are coming from unexpected places. It's not as though the documentary community has thrown up its hands and abandoned long-form linear documentary. That's alive and well and will remain so. Rather, it's that the radical or progressive fringe of the documentary community has picked up on some of these two techniques. They've seen that they can do some remarkable things with it. It's not just the radical fringe, it's organizations like the National Film Board of Canada that have made a major commitment in this sector, a growing commitment, and they've seen the results in terms of growing audience share, in terms of being able to reach beyond the broadcast market, the national limits of a broadcast market, and reach an international market. They've seen the ability of these new forms to engage audiences, not just to let audiences watch these films and maybe be inspired by them, but actually deepen themselves, move around, navigate, explore, and engage in this work. A lot of other disciplines besides just documentary makers have been involved here, and I just want to mention a few. People that are involved in interactive art or new media art have been central to these developments. Folks coming from areas like cartography, and especially performative cartography, where the motion of the body in space, it's not just about maps, it's about performing maps. Those folks have been very important. Game studies has been an area that's yielded a lot. Gamers often think about narrative worlds of possibility that the user has to negotiate and navigate. So a lot of development here, and what we're here to, naturally these developments bring with them terrific opportunities, but also a lot of challenges. Challenges like language. Do we call this documentary, or do we call it interactive, or collaborative, or location? Do we use some prefix? I guess you could answer that question by thinking about video. Do we call it all the time digital video? We've dropped the digital. We just call it video. So probably we're in a transition phase, and we'll keep those prefixes, but they're not long to stay. I think another set of questions that we have are about frameworks for evaluation. How do you tell a good one from a bad one? That's very important to funders. It's very important to publics, because if they hit a few bad ones, they're probably not going to go back for more. So how can we build up a body of criticism, a set of critical frameworks to understand these new film forms? A lot of questions here, and questions that have implications for funders. What will they fund and what won't they fund? What category do things fit in? How do we show these things at festivals? Something that's best seen on a laptop where you, the user, can navigate your way through it. What do you do in a public setting? So these are some of the questions that are percolating through this space. The main thing I want to get across is that this is an incredibly exciting moment. This is a moment where we're seeing the birth of a set of new strategies, new possibilities, new forms. They have not yet been tamed. There's not yet an orthodoxy or a set of rules or a set of conventions for people to fall back on. There's nothing but possibility. And that's exciting. That's a really exciting moment. It's exciting for makers because they can do anything and see if it works, throw it at the wall and see if it sticks. It's exciting for us, the participants. We're no longer the audience, but now we're co-collaborators in these projects. And it's going to be interesting to see what survives, which of these forms, if there's the usual process of reification and hard wiring, hard baking of some forms, or if we're actually going to see this plurality increase. A lot of big questions in terms of areas like ethics. Who owns this material that's online? If you do a cut version, are you the owner, or is the person who supplied the footage the owner? Crowdsourcing, what are the ethics of, is there an ethical issue there if you're making money on the backs of what the crowd has produced? A ton of issues on that sector. Whole lot of issues having to do with legacy. How will we preserve and hold this moment? How do we keep these artifacts? Many of them are on relatively fragile platforms that are here today and gone next year. Sometimes they morph over, sometimes they don't. But for historians, or at least the historians of the future, folks with my line of work, when they come back and look at this moment, what will be here to look at? Will they see the huge array of steps that we've taken? So these and a bunch of other questions are things that we'll bring up with the panel. And the format today will essentially be to have a discussion with the panelists. I'd like to introduce them. I'll introduce them as a group and then go through one by one with a few questions so we can talk about who they are, what their work is, and then we'll open it up for discussion. So next to me here is Ingrid Kopp, who's the new media consultant for the Tribeca Film Institute, where she runs the TFI New Media Fund. And that's really crucial because that's the place that stimulates, that makes possible a lot of this new work. It's a very new fund. It's started up this year, 2011. And basically it's brokering forward fund money. Ingrid is has the critical acumen and knows and apparatus to sort of shepherd this money into the hands of the right people. So she occupies a very crucial bottleneck of possibility. She stands between the resources and those out there with a lot of good ideas, and so a key decision maker, a shaper of the field. Next to Ingrid is Patricia Zimmerman, a fellow academic. Patty and I have been around the block a few times and know each other for many years. She's professor in the Department of Cinema, Photography, and Media Arts at Ithaca College, co-directs the Finger Lakes Environmental Film Festival, author of Real Families, A Social History of Amateur Film, Mining the Home Movie, Excavation, History and Memories, States of Emergency, Documentaries, Wars, and Democracy. And what's really intriguing about Patty's work is that it's really focused on sectors that a lot of other scholars have ignored. So the home movie is a great example of a kind of, again, a grassroots approach to media, something that ordinary people do, doesn't necessarily get a lot of public attention, but it has profound private meaning. And that's a crucial sector, especially today as we think about collaborative and community-based filmmaking. So that's where some of her work is situated. Next to Patty is Jerry Flahive, who is a senior producer for the National Film Board of Canada, a remarkable organization, one of the world's few that continues to fund the production of documentaries on a relatively large scale. I think, Jerry, you said 14,000 documentaries to date. That's an incredible record. And he's been the producer on a number of award-winning films, Water Life and High Rise, prominent among them, and we'll talk about those. He's in the position, he's someone who's really seen the transformation of the industry. He's been there for the long haul, has seen this transformation happen, and he's seen it happen in an organization that has been, I think, really the world's leader. If one had to point to an organization that is doing some of the most interesting work out there, it's the work that's coming out of NFB for a bunch of distinctive Canadian reasons that we will soon discover. And finally, at the end of the table is Shari Freelow, who's senior programmer for the Sundance Film Festival and curator of the New Frontier section there. And the New Frontier section is where this kind of work, installation-based documentary, interactive documentary, the new stuff, it's the repository of the new. And Shari is, in that sense, just as Ingrid is sort of funneling the money, Shari is shaping the taste out there and also helping with the financial, obviously through that, the financial side. Exhibition is a really crucial sector, and that's something that as a festival, as someone who organizes a festival, it's really a set of concerns that she's faced with on a regular basis. Shari, you've been there for 11 years, I think, so you've been there.
Yeah, we'll stop at 11.
Okay, won't count. And I should probably mention that you're also an award-winning filmmaker and artist. You've done installation work as well as film work, and your work's been seen in lots of festivals. So you've been on both sides of that dance. And Shari, why don't I just, well, no, maybe Ingrid, I'll start with you, because money is where a lot of this begins. So.
Probably should go to Canada then. We're only little.
Well, let's do that. That's not a bad idea, because there's an institutional model that covers everything. You guys worry about exhibition, distribution, funding. There have been some interesting changes there. And that's probably the rock against which, or the metric against which all of the things are measured. And then we can see how the rest of us are trying to.
And its title is Adapting Journalism to the Web. And it's going to be a wide-ranging discussion about the ways in which the journalistic principles and techniques of the print era are migrating or not migrating onto the web, and whether that's a good or a bad thing. The final event will be held at the end of the term in early May, on May 4th, and it's titled Electronic Literature and Future Books. Riccio, the director of the Comparative Media Studies program and the author of, or editor of a number of significant books, including most recently two books that I think are edited books, Media Cultures and We Europeans, Media, New Collectivities, and Europe. I perhaps should conclude here by saying that as the comparative media documentary filmmakers, producers, media practitioners of various kinds, and scholars, and my hope is that the people at the table will remember that some members of the audience haven't been there for your earlier discourse. Distill your ideas. We're very eager to hear your most powerful and compelling insights about this central subject. Our moderator today is my friend and colleague, William Uricchio. Studies program has evolved, especially trying to recover from the departure of the visionary Henry Jenkins. William Uricchio has been our lodestar and leader, and he's been doing, I think, quite remarkable work in renovating and reconstituting the comparative media studies program. One piece of evidence for that is this remarkable forum and the activities that preceded it, in which so many media practitioners began to, and I hope many of you will attend that event or pay attention to that, or check our website where our events are archived in various formats. It remains only for me to welcome our speakers and to indicate to those of you in the audience who are new today that in some sense this forum represents a kind of culmination of a day-long set of conversations among